The laughter reached Serene Holbrook before she saw the faces behind it. It rippled through the ballroom like poison through water, sharp and glittering and unmistakably cruel. She stood near the towering marble pillar where she'd positioned herself an hour ago, half hidden by a cascade of white roses and flickering candlelight, willing herself to become invisible. It hadn't worked. Is that truly her? A voice floated from the cluster of young women gathered near the refreshment table, their silk fans fluttering like the wings of predatory birds. The Holbrook spinster? I thought she'd stopped attending these things years ago. Apparently not. Another voice, honey-sweet and venomous. Though one wonders why she bothers. It's not as if anyone will ask her to dance. More laughter. Serene's fingers tightened around the glass of lemonade she hadn't touched, the crystal cool against her heated skin. She should leave. She should have never come. But her cousin Delphine had begged for a companion tonight, and Serene had foolishly believed she could slip through the Ashmore ball unnoticed, a shadow among the glittering butterflies. She'd forgotten that shadows could still be mocked. 27 years old, the first voice continued, louder now, deliberately carrying, and still unmarried. My mother says her father lost everything in that shipping scandal. They're practically paupers now, living off the charity of relatives. Then why invite her? Lady Ashmore invites everyone. She's pathologically democratic. But look at that dress. It's at least 4 seasons old. The lace is practically yellowed. Serene didn't look down at her gown. She knew what she was wearing. Her mother's best evening dress, carefully altered and retrimmed, elegant in its simplicity, but hopelessly outdated compared to the frothy confection surrounding her. The pale blue silk had been beautiful once, when her mother had worn it to balls where she'd been welcomed, admired, sought after. That was before her father's business partner had disappeared with their fortune, before the scandal had consumed them like wildfire, before Serene's engagement had been quietly dissolved by a family who suddenly found her circumstances incompatible with their son's future, before she'd become the forgotten Miss Holbrook, a cautionary tale whispered in drawing rooms, a reminder of how quickly a woman could fall from grace. She was engaged once, you know. The gossip continued, relentless. To Lord Stanhope's second son. He dropped her the moment the scandal broke. Didn't even have the decency to tell her in person. Sent a letter through his solicitor. Devastating. Practical, more like. Who would want damaged goods? The glass in Serene's hand trembled. She set it down on a nearby ledge before she shattered it. Her jaw clenched so tight, her teeth ached. She would not cry. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. She had survived worse than the barbed tongues of silly girls who had never known a moment of true hardship. But God, it hurt. After 3 years of careful invisibility, of declining invitations, and avoiding society, she'd thought perhaps the memory had faded. Perhaps she could attend one ball without becoming entertainment for the bored and beautiful. She'd been wrong. I almost feel sorry for her. The honey-voiced woman again, her sympathy as false as paste jewels. Standing there alone, pretending she doesn't hear us. It's rather pathetic, isn't it? Like a ghost haunting a party she wasn't invited to. Not invited. Tolerated. There's a difference. Serene had heard enough. She turned to slip away, to find Delphine and make whatever excuse would allow her to flee with a shred of dignity intact, when she collided with something solid and warm. Someone. Her lemonade glass, the one she'd thought she'd set down, toppled from somewhere and splashed across the front of a midnight black waistcoat. She watched in horror as the pale liquid spread across what was clearly the most expensive fabric she'd ever ruined. "I'm so sorry," she breathed, stumbling backward. "I didn't see. I wasn't. Clearly." The voice was deep, dry and utterly without warmth. Serene forced herself to look up past the ruined waistcoat, past the perfectly tied cravat, past the sharp line of a jaw that could have been carved from marble, until she met eyes the color of winter storms. Cold, assessing, completely unreadable. The man was tall enough that she had to crane her neck, with dark hair swept back from a face that balanced on the knife's edge between handsome and severe. Everything about him spoke of authority. The breadth of his shoulders, the stillness of his posture, the way he looked at her as if cataloging her every flaw for future reference. Behind her, the gossiping women had fallen silent. The entire corner of the ballroom seemed to hold its breath. "I'll pay for the cleaning," Serene managed, though the words were absurd even as she spoke them. She couldn't afford to pay for anything. Or the replacement. Do you know who I am?" The question cut through her stammering. She blinked, thrown by its directness. No, I apologize. I don't—" Calum Ravencroft. He said it as if the name should mean something, as if the syllables themselves should make her knees buckle. Duke of Ashworth. Duke. The word crashed through Serene's awareness with the force of a physical blow. She had just spilled lemonade on a duke, not just any duke, the Duke of Ashworth, whose family was so old and so powerful that they'd reportedly declined an offer of a higher title from the crown itself, considering it unnecessary. She was going to be sick. "Your Grace." She dropped into a curtsy, her cheeks burning. "I am truly, deeply sorry. I didn't mean—" "You didn't mean to assault me with citrus?" One dark eyebrow rose fractionally. How reassuring. The laughter behind her started again, louder now, delighted by this new humiliation. Of course. She'd thought her evening couldn't get worse, and the universe had decided to prove her spectacularly wrong. "The forgotten Miss Holbrook strikes again," someone whispered, not quietly enough. The Duke's gaze shifted, moving past Serene to the cluster of young women who were watching the scene with undisguised glee. Something flickered in those storm-colored eyes. Something cold and sharp and dangerous. Then he did something impossible. He offered Serene his hand. "Dance with me," he said. The words made no sense. Serene stared at his outstretched hand. Elegant, powerful, still slightly damp with lemonade, and wondered if she'd finally lost her mind entirely. "I'm sorry." The next waltz begins in approximately 30 seconds. His voice carried no inflection, no explanation. "I require a partner. You're standing here. Dance with me." Behind her, she heard a strangled sound of disbelief. Lady Lysanne Carlyle, for Serene had finally placed the honey-sweet voice, stepped forward, her beautiful face arranged in a mask of confusion and barely concealed fury. "Your Grace," Lady Lysanne said, her tone suggesting the Duke had simply made a mistake. "Surely you meant to ask." "I said precisely what I meant." The Duke didn't look at her. His attention remained fixed on Serene, with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "Miss Holbrook, your answer." The ballroom had gone quiet. Hundreds of eyes watched from every direction. The matrons with their lorgnettes raised, the young ladies frozen mid-gossip, the gentlemen pausing their conversations to witness whatever spectacle was unfolding. The Duke of Ashworth was asking the forgotten spinster to dance. The Duke of Ashworth, who reportedly hadn't danced with anyone in over a year. The Duke of Ashworth, who was looking at her as if she held the answer to a question she didn't understand. "Why?" The word escaped before she could stop it. The corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but something close. Something that made her breath catch despite herself. "Because," he said quietly for her ears alone, "you're going to help me destroy someone's expectations. And in return, Miss Holbrook, I'm going to rebuild yours." Before she could ask what that meant, his hand closed around hers, and he pulled her onto the dance floor. The orchestra began to play. Every eye in the ballroom followed them, and Seren Holbrook, who had spent 3 years trying to disappear, suddenly found herself the most visible woman in London. The waltz felt like drowning in full view of the world. Seren's hand trembled in the Duke's grasp as he led her through the opening steps, his movements precise, controlled, utterly confident. She, by contrast, felt like a marionette whose strings were being pulled by a stranger, technically functional, but wooden and graceless. "Breathe," he murmured, his voice pitched low enough that only she could hear. "You're dancing as if you expect me to bite you." "You might," she managed. "I did ruin your waistcoat." A waistcoat can be replaced. The expression on Lady Lysanne's face cannot. Something that might have been satisfaction flickered across his features. "She looks positively apoplectic. Don't turn to check, trust me." "I wasn't going to." "You were considering it." She had been. Serene forced herself to focus on the Duke instead, on the firm pressure of his hand at her waist, the way he guided her through the turns without seeming to exert any effort at all. Up close, he was even more intimidating than he'd been at a distance. The sharp lines of his face held no softness, no warmth, nothing to suggest he was capable of ordinary human emotions. And yet he'd asked her to dance. "You said something," she ventured, finding her courage, "about destroying expectations, rebuilding mine. I don't understand what that means." "Not here." His grip tightened fractionally as they swept through a complicated turn, bringing her closer to his chest than was strictly proper. "Too many ears." "Then why ask me to dance at all? If you didn't intend to explain, I intended to remove you from a pack of wolves who were tearing you apart for sport." His eyes met hers, storm gray and unflinching. "Was I mistaken in thinking you'd prefer rescue to continued humiliation?" The bluntness of it stole her breath. No one spoke to her like this, without pretense, without careful social cushioning. It was jarring and honest, and strangely refreshing. "No," she admitted. "You weren't mistaken." "Good. Then we understand each other." They didn't understand each other at all. But before Seren could say so, the waltz ended. The Duke released her with formal precision, bowing over her hand in a gesture that drew every eye in the ballroom. "I'll call on you tomorrow," he said, loud enough to be heard by those nearest. "At 3 o'clock. We have much to discuss, Miss Holbrook." Serene's mouth opened, but no sound emerged. He was going to call on her? A Duke was going to call on her? In what universe did that make any sense? Your Grace, I'm not certain. 3 o'clock." He straightened, and for just a moment, something almost human flickered in those cold eyes. "Wear something practical. We won't be staying in the parlor." He strode away before she could respond, cutting through the crowd with the ease of a man who had never been denied anything in his life. Seren stood frozen on the dance floor, surrounded by whispers that rose like smoke, her pulse racing against her ribs. What had just happened? "Seren!" Delphine materialized at her elbow, cheeks flushed with excitement. Did the Duke of Ashworth just... Everyone is talking. What did he say to you?" "I don't know." Seren's voice came out strange and distant. "I honestly don't know." But she intended to find out. He arrived at precisely 3 o'clock. Seren had spent the morning in a state of anxious disbelief, half convinced the entire evening had been a fever dream. She'd changed her dress 4 times before settling on a simple gray walking gown. Practical, as he'd instructed, though she still had no idea why. Her mother had been beside herself with questions. Her father had emerged from his study for the first time in weeks, curiosity temporarily overwhelming his despair. Even the servants seemed electrified by the news that a duke, would be visiting their modest rented townhouse. When the knock came, Seren's heart stuttered. The Duke entered the cramped parlor like a storm contained in human form, his presence immediately overwhelming the shabby furniture and faded wallpaper. He was dressed for the outdoors. Dark coat, polished boots, no trace of yesterday's lemonade disaster. "Miss Holbrook," he inclined his head. "You followed instructions. I appreciate efficiency. You gave me very little choice, Your Grace." "I gave you ample choice. You could have refused to be home." His gaze swept the room, missing nothing. Not the careful patches on the upholstery, not the single coal struggling in the grate, not the conspicuous absence of luxury. "You chose to be curious instead. That tells me what I needed to know." Seren's spine stiffened. "And what did you need to know?" "That you're intelligent enough to recognize an opportunity." He gestured toward the door. "Walk with me. What I have to say requires privacy, and these walls are thin." It was presumptuous. It was improper. A respectable woman did not simply leave with an unmarried man, duke or otherwise, without chaperone or explanation. But Seren had stopped being respectable 3 years ago, when society decided she wasn't worth the effort. She collected her cloak and followed him out. The park was nearly empty at this hour, the fashionable set preferring later promenades when they could see and be seen. The Duke walked beside her in silence for several minutes, his pace measured, his expression thoughtful. Finally, he spoke. "I need a wife." Serene nearly stumbled. "I beg your pardon? Or rather, I need society to believe I'm seeking one." He continued as if he hadn't just made the most extraordinary statement she'd ever heard. "My grandmother has taken it upon herself to arrange my marriage. She's settled on Lady Lysanne Carlyle, beautiful, wealthy, connected. Precisely the sort of woman a duke should marry. And you don't want to marry her?" "I don't want to marry anyone." The words came out flat, final. "Not yet. Perhaps not ever. But my grandmother is relentless, and Lady Lysanne believes we have an understanding. Last night, you provided me with an alternative." Understanding began to dawn, cold and clarifying. "You want me to pretend to be your romantic interest. I want you to occupy the space Lady Lysanne expects to fill. Attend events as my guest. Allow society to speculate about my intentions. Create enough doubt that my grandmother cannot force an engagement without appearing to override my wishes publicly. And in exchange?" The Duke stopped walking, turning to face her directly. In the pale afternoon light, his features seemed less severe, more weary. This was a man carrying burdens she couldn't see. "In exchange," he said, "I will restore your family's reputation. I will ensure your father receives investment opportunities that will rebuild what he lost. I will provide you with a wardrobe, a proper allowance, and introductions that will open doors currently closed to you." His eyes held hers. "When this ends, you won't return to obscurity, Miss Holbrook. You'll have the means to build whatever life you choose. It was impossible. It was absurd. It was. It was quite possibly the most dangerous thing anyone had ever offered her." "Why me?" she demanded. "There must be dozens of women you could choose. Women with fewer complications. Women who would expect it to be real." His voice softened fractionally. "Women who would develop hopes I cannot fulfill. You, Miss Holbrook, have had hope beaten out of you by circumstance. You understand that this is a transaction. That makes you ideal." The brutal accuracy of his assessment struck her like a blow. He was right. 3 years of disappointment had stripped away her romantic illusions. She wouldn't make the mistake of believing this was anything but business. "Your grandmother," she said slowly. "She'll investigate me. She'll discover Let her discover. Your father made a poor business decision based on the betrayal of a trusted partner. There's no scandal in that, only misfortune. Society loves a sympathetic victim almost as much as it loves a villain. Seren stared at him, this cold, calculating stranger who was offering her everything she'd lost. And if I say no? The Duke's expression didn't change. Then I'll escort you home, and we'll never speak again. The choice is entirely yours, Miss Holbrook. The choice? As if there was any choice at all for a woman in her position. I have conditions, she heard herself say. Something flickered in those winter-gray eyes. Interest, respect, perhaps both. Name them. Ashworth House rose from the London streets like a monument to generations of accumulated power. Serene stood on the pavement, clutching her small valise. Everything she'd been permitted to bring, since everything else would be replaced, and tried to remember how to breathe. The mansion's cream-colored facade stretched impossibly wide, its windows gleaming like watchful eyes, its columns suggesting that mere mortals should reconsider approaching. She had negotiated 3 conditions with the Duke. First, her family would receive written confirmation of the investment opportunities immediately, not contingent on her performance. She would not be held hostage by promises. Second, she would have complete freedom to end the arrangement if she felt unsafe, uncomfortable, or compromised. No questions asked, no penalties applied. Third, when it ended, he would provide letters of introduction that would secure her a position as a companion or governess in a respectable household. She would not return to poverty. The Duke had agreed to all 3 without hesitation. That ease should have been reassuring. Instead, it made her wonder what she'd failed to anticipate. Miss Holbrook. A footman in immaculate livery stood at the open front door, his expression professionally neutral. Behind him, the entrance hall glittered with marble and crystal, a world of wealth and consequence she was about to enter under false pretenses. "Yes," she managed. "I'm Miss Holbrook. This way, please. Lady Marisol is expecting you." Lady Marisol, the Duke's younger sister, who would serve as Seren's official hostess and the excuse for her presence. A companion for the season, the story went. A friend from my sister's charitable endeavors. Lies built upon lies, constructing a reality that had never existed. The interior of Ashworth House made the exterior seem modest. Serene walked through halls adorned with paintings that probably cost more than her father's entire lost fortune. Past sculptures that watched her progress with classical indifference. Under ceilings painted with scenes of mythology and triumph. Every surface whispered of generations of power, of a family that had shaped history, while her own had been crushed by it. What was she doing here? "Miss Holbrook!" The voice was bright, musical, and accompanied by the rapid clicking of heels on marble. A young woman descended the grand staircase with the energy of a summer thunderstorm, her dark hair bouncing with each step, her smile wide and apparently genuine. She was perhaps 19 or 20, with her brother's gray eyes but none of his coldness. Where Calum Ravencroft radiated controlled intensity, his sister practically vibrated with warmth. "I'm Marisol. Mari, please. No one calls me Marisol except grandmother when she's angry, which is frequently, but never mind that." She grabbed Seren's hands without ceremony, squeezing them with enthusiasm. "Calum told me everything. Well, probably not everything. He's dreadfully secretive, but enough. This is going to be wonderful. You're going to be wonderful. I can already tell." Seren blinked, overwhelmed by the deluge of words and warmth. Thank you. I think. Come. I'll show you to your rooms. Rooms, plural, because Calum insisted you have the Rose Suite, which is absurdly grand, but he gets terribly stubborn about certain things. Mari linked her arm through Serene's as if they'd known each other for years. Don't let him intimidate you, by the way. He seems cold, but underneath all that frost, there's a real human person. Possibly. I've seen evidence occasionally. Despite everything, Seren felt her lips twitch. That's reassuring, isn't it? Now, tell me everything. Where did you grow up? What books do you read? Do you play any instruments? I play the pianoforte terribly, but with great enthusiasm, which I think should count for something. Mari's chatter carried them through corridors and up staircases, past more artwork and luxury than Seren could process. She answered questions where she could, asked her own when Mari paused for breath, and slowly felt some of the tension in her shoulders begin to ease. Perhaps this wouldn't be entirely terrible. The Rose Suite earned its name. Everything was shades of blush and cream, from the silk hangings on the four-poster bed to the delicate rose pattern on the wallpaper. The sitting room had its own fireplace, already lit and crackling cheerfully. The wardrobe stood empty, waiting for the gowns that would arrive from the modiste tomorrow. "It's beautiful," Seren said, and meant it. "It's yours, for as long as you need it." Mari's voice softened, losing some of its manic energy. "I know this must be strange, being here, pretending to be something you're not. But I want you to know, whatever brought you to us, whatever arrangement you've made with my brother, I'm glad you're here. This house has been too quiet for too long." Something in her tone caught Seren's attention. "Too quiet?" Mari's smile flickered. "Since our father died, Kylum has been different, closed off. He works constantly, sleeps rarely, and speaks to almost no one except in formal necessities. Grandmother thinks he needs a wife to fix him. I think he needs a reason to come back to life." She met Seren's eyes. "Maybe you can give him one." Before Seren could respond, before she could explain that she was a temporary solution, not a cure, a knock came at the door. A young maid entered, curtsying. "Miss Holbrook, I'm Tansy. I've been assigned as your lady's maid for the duration of your stay." She carried a tea tray laden with delicate pastries. "I thought you might be hungry after your journey." The small kindness, unexpected and unprompted, made Seren's throat tighten. "Thank you, Tansy. That's very thoughtful." Mari squeezed her hand once more. "Rest tonight. Tomorrow, we begin transforming you into the most talked-about woman in London." Her grin returned, bright and conspiratorial. "Lady Lysanne won't know what happened." She swept out, leaving Seren alone with Tansy and the crackling fire and the overwhelming reality of what she'd agreed to. She moved to the window, looking out over the manicured gardens below. Somewhere in this house, the Duke was doing whatever dukes did, managing estates, attending Parliament, avoiding the grandmother who wanted to control his future. They were strangers bound by a business arrangement, nothing more. So why, a small voice whispered in her mind, did his sister speak of bringing him back to life? And why did some foolish part of her wonder if she could? The Dowager Duchess of Ashworth did not descend staircases. She commanded them. Seren stood in the morning room the following day, dressed in one of the 3 acceptable gowns Mari had rushed from the modiste overnight, when the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. She turned to find an older woman framed in the doorway, like a portrait of aristocratic disapproval. Augustina Ravencroft was not what Seren had expected. She'd imagined someone soft with age, perhaps frail, certainly manageable. The woman before her was none of those things. Tall and silver-haired, with cheekbones that could cut glass, and eyes the same cool gray as her grandson's, she radiated the kind of authority that came from 7 decades of never being told no. "So," the single syllable fell like a judge's gavel. "This is the creature who spilled lemonade on my grandson and somehow convinced him to bring her into my home." Seren curtsied, grateful for years of her mother's rigorous instruction. Your Grace, I apologize for the unconventional introduction. Unconventional? The dowager's lips pressed into a thin line. That's a generous description for what I've heard. The Holbrook girl, publicly mocked at the Ashmore ball, rescued by a duke who hasn't danced with anyone in 14 months. Do you have any idea what kind of speculation that's caused? I imagine considerable speculation, Your Grace. Considerable. The older woman moved into the room with the grace of a predator, circling Seren slowly. The betting books at White's have odds on an engagement announcement within the fortnight. Lady Lysanne's mother has already sent 3 letters demanding explanation. And my grandson, who has barely spoken a complete sentence since his father's death, suddenly has opinions about guest suites and modiste appointments. Seren kept her expression neutral, though her pulse quickened. The Duke has been very generous. The Duke has been very foolish. The Dowager rose, her fury barely contained beneath a veneer of aristocratic control. But he's always been stubborn, like his father before him, like every Ravencroft man since the conquest, apparently. She gestured sharply to a chair. Sit. Tell me who you really are. And do not insult my intelligence with whatever fiction Kylam has concocted. Seren sat, folding her hands in her lap to hide their trembling. The Dowager settled across from her, posture perfect, gaze unrelenting. There was no point in elaborate deception. This woman would see through it instantly. My name is Seren Holbrook, she began. My father was Alaric Holbrook, a shipping merchant who built a successful business over 20 years. 3 years ago, his partner embezzled everything and fled to the continent. We lost our home, our standing, our future. I was engaged to Lord Stanhope's second son. The engagement was dissolved within a week of the scandal breaking. The Dowager's expression revealed nothing. Continue. Since then, my family has survived on the charity of distant relatives and my mother's discreet needlework. I've spent 3 years avoiding society, knowing I would be mocked if I appeared. Last night, I attended the Ashmore ball as a favor to my cousin. The rest, she lifted her chin. The rest, you know. I know the facts. I want to understand the arrangement. The Dowager leaned forward slightly. My grandson does not act impulsively. He does not rescue damsels in distress. He certainly does not invite impoverished strangers to live in his home. So what, precisely, did he offer you? Seren met the older woman's eyes directly. Honesty had served her once. Perhaps it would serve her again. He offered me restoration, my family's reputation, my father's business prospects, my own future security. In exchange, I occupy the position Lady Lysanne expects to fill, creating enough uncertainty that you cannot force an engagement without public embarrassment. The silence that followed was absolute. Then, impossibly, the Dowager laughed. It was not a warm sound, more like ice cracking, but it was genuine. At least you're honest. I was beginning to think the entire younger generation had lost the capacity for directness. Honesty seemed more efficient than pretense, Your Grace. It usually is. The Dowager rose, moving to the window, her back to Seren. My grandson hired you to disrupt my plans. You've admitted as much. I should have you removed from this house within the hour. Seren's stomach clenched, but she kept her voice steady. That is your prerogative. Yes, it is. The Dowager turned, and something in her expression had shifted. Not softened, exactly, but changed. Tell me about Kylam. What is your impression of him? The question caught Seren off guard. I've barely spoken with him, Your Grace. He's controlled, precise. He speaks as if every word costs him something. He didn't used to be that way. For the first time, Something like grief flickered across the dowager's features. Before Hadrian died, my son, his father, Calum was different. Not warm, exactly, but present, engaged with the world. He laughed occasionally. He had friends. She returned to her chair, settling with less rigidity than before. Hadrian died 8 months ago, a riding accident on the northern estate. Calum was in London, attending to parliamentary duties. By the time he received word and traveled north, she paused. He didn't arrive in time. Not to say goodbye. Not even to close his father's eyes. The weight of the revelation pressed against Seren's chest. I'm sorry. Are you? Or is that simply the appropriate response? Both. Seren held the older woman's gaze. I understand loss, Your Grace. Perhaps not this kind, but I understand watching someone you love disappear piece by piece. My father is still alive, but the man he was died with his business. I've grieved him for 3 years while he sits in his study, staring at nothing. The dowager studied her for a long moment. You have spine, Miss Holbrook. Foolish spine, perhaps. You should have lied and told me what I wanted to hear. But spine nonetheless. Would lies have served me better? No. I'd have known immediately and had you removed. A ghost of a smile crossed her thin lips. I'm not going to stop you. Whatever this arrangement is, whatever Calum hopes to achieve, I'll allow it to proceed. Relief flooded through Seren, but caution followed immediately. Why? Because my grandson has shown more initiative in the past 2 days than he has in 8 months. Because Lady Lizanne is a vapid creature who would bore him within a fortnight. Because... The dowager rose, moving toward the door. Because I want him to live again. And if some impoverished merchant's daughter, with more courage than sense, is what shakes him from his stupor, so be it. She paused at the threshold, turning back. But understand this, Miss Holbrook. If you hurt him, if you exploit his grief or manipulate his emotions for your own gain, I will ensure you never recover. You think you've experienced social destruction? You have no concept of what I can accomplish when properly motivated. I understand, Your Grace. Good. The dowager's expression hardened back into aristocratic marble. Dinner is at 8. Dress appropriately, and do try not to spill anything else on my grandson. She swept out, leaving Seren alone with her racing thoughts and the unsettling realization that she had just received both a warning and a blessing from the most formidable woman in London. Through the window, she could see the gardens below, where a solitary figure walked among the hedges. Calum. Even from this distance, she could see the tension in his shoulders, the weight he carried. Bring him back to life, Mari had said. I want him to live again, the dowager had echoed. Serene hadn't agreed to resurrect anyone. She'd agreed to a performance, a transaction, a temporary escape from poverty. So why did some part of her ache to try? The week that followed was a whirlwind of silk and strategy. Madame Verity, the modiste Marie had summoned, descended upon Ashworth House with an army of assistants and enough fabric to clothe half of London. Seren stood for hours, while they pinned and measured and debated colors, her body becoming a canvas for someone else's vision. The sapphire brings out her eyes, Madame Verity declared, holding a swatch against Seren's cheek. And the champagne for the Thornbury ball. Understated elegance, not trying too hard. We want them to wonder, not assume. Wonder what? Seren asked. Whether you're the Duke's future Duchess, of course. The modiste's smile was knowing. The right gown asks questions. The wrong gown answers them too quickly. Between fittings, Mari coached her on society's labyrinthine rules, which families were allied, which ancient feuds still simmered beneath polite smiles, Which dowagers could destroy a reputation with a single raised eyebrow? Lady Thornberry is a dragon, but a fair one, Mari explained, pacing the drawing room. Lady Crestwood is worse. She'll smile to your face and eviscerate you the moment you turn away. Lord Fenwick is a notorious fortune hunter. Don't let him corner you near the refreshments. And whatever you do, don't mention hunting dogs to Lord Huxley. He'll talk for hours, and you'll never escape. What about Lady Lysanne? Mari's expression darkened. Lysanne is complicated. She's beautiful and clever, and absolutely convinced that Calum belongs to her. Grandmother encouraged the match, still encourages it, despite everything. They've known each other since childhood. Were they ever actually engaged? Not formally, but there was an understanding, or at least Lysanne believes there was. Mari sank onto the settee. She'll see you as a threat. She'll try to destroy you. She already tried at the Ashmore ball. That was practice. Mari's eyes, so like her brother's, held genuine concern. The real battle hasn't started yet. Calum remained largely absent. Seren glimpsed him occasionally, crossing the entrance hall, disappearing into his study, riding out at dawn when he thought no one was watching. He acknowledged her with formal nods, exchanged the minimum required pleasantries at dinner, and otherwise maintained a careful distance. It should have suited her. This was a business arrangement, not a friendship. His remoteness made it easier to remember that. But on the fifth evening, she found herself drawn to the library. The room was Ashworth House's hidden heart. 2 stories of books rising toward a painted ceiling, spiral staircases connecting the levels, leather chairs positioned near a fireplace that crackled with comfortable warmth. She'd discovered it while exploring and had returned every evening since, losing herself in volumes her family could never have afforded. Tonight, she wasn't alone. Calum sat in one of the leather chairs, papers spread across a small table, a glass of amber liquid at his elbow. He looked up when she entered, and for just a moment, something flickered in those gray eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or something she couldn't name. Miss Holbrook. Your Grace. She hesitated in the doorway. I can leave if you prefer solitude. I prefer honesty. He gestured to the chair across from him. You've been coming here every evening. I've seen the books moved, the cushions disturbed. You might as well stop skulking and actually join me. Heat rose to her cheeks, but she entered, settling into the offered chair. I wasn't skulking. I was being discreet. Is there a difference? Skulking implies ill intent. I merely didn't want to intrude. The corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. Consider this blanket permission to intrude. The books are meant to be read, not preserved as museum pieces. They sat in surprisingly comfortable silence. Calum returned to his papers. Seren selected a volume of poetry from a nearby shelf and tried to focus on the words. But her attention kept drifting to him, the furrow of concentration between his brows, the precise way he turned pages, the weariness that seemed to cling to him like a second skin. You're staring, he said without looking up. I'm observing. It's different. That earned her an actual glance, something almost like amusement warming his features. And what have you observed? That you work too hard, that you carry tension in your shoulders like armor, that you're avoiding sleep based on the shadows under your eyes. She paused. That you're avoiding something else too, but I haven't determined what. His hand stilled on the papers. You presume much for someone I've known barely a week. You hired me to be your convincing romantic interest. That requires a certain level of observation. She set down her book. Your grandmother told me about your father, about how you didn't arrive in time. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. My grandmother, Calum said finally, his voice carefully controlled, speaks too freely. She's worried about you. So is Mari. They say you've been different since he died. Closed off. Absent. They say a great many things. Are they wrong? He rose abruptly, moving to the fireplace, presenting her with his back. The flames cast dancing shadows across his profile, hiding and revealing in equal measure. My father wrote to me the week before he died, he said quietly. He wanted me to come north to discuss something important. He said it couldn't wait. A muscle worked in his jaw. I decided it could. I had parliamentary duties, meetings that seemed crucial at the time. I told him I'd visit the following month. Serene's chest constricted. You couldn't have known. No, but I chose politics over my father, and he died alone because of it. He turned to face her, and the rawness in his expression stole her breath. So yes, Miss Holbrook, I'm avoiding something. I'm avoiding the question of whether my last communication with my father was a dismissal. She rose without thinking, crossing to stand before him. Not touching, she wouldn't presume that far, but close enough to matter. My father lost everything, she said softly, and I was angry with him. For months, I blamed him for trusting the wrong partner, for risking our security, for destroying my engagement and my future. I said terrible things. Her voice wavered. Sometimes the people we love see us at our worst. It doesn't mean we loved them less. Something shifted in his expression, a crack in the ice, quickly concealed. You're rather wise for someone who's been through what you have. Suffering has that effect. They stood there, the fire crackling between them and the books, watching silently from their shelves. The moment stretched, weighted with something neither of them was ready to name. Finally, Calum stepped back. The Thornberry Ball is tomorrow evening. We should discuss strategy. The spell broke, but something had changed. Seren felt it in the air between them, in the way he looked at her now. Not as a tool or a temporary solution, but as something more. Something dangerous. Of course, Your Grace. She returned to her chair. What should I expect? War, he said simply. Lady Lisanne will be there, and she doesn't intend to lose. The champagne gown was a masterpiece. Seren barely recognized herself in the mirror. Madame Verity had worked magic. The silk skimmed her figure before falling in elegant waves, the color warming her complexion, the delicate beading catching light with every movement. Her dark hair was swept up in an intricate arrangement, threaded with tiny pearls that Mari had insisted on lending. You look like someone who belongs, Mari breathed, circling her with undisguised delight. Lisanne is going to weep with jealousy. I doubt Lady Lisanne has ever wept in her life. Then she'll seethe beautifully, even better. The Dowager's assessment was briefer, but equally impactful. She examined Seren from head to toe, nodded once, and said, You'll do. Don't embarrass us. Calum waited in the entrance hall, devastating in formal evening black. His gaze swept over her once, quickly, controlled, but she caught the slight intake of breath, the momentary stillness before he composed himself. Miss Holbrook, his voice was carefully neutral. The gown is well chosen. Your sister has excellent taste. Yes, he offered his arm. She does. The Thornberry Ball blazed with light and consequence. The mansion was even grander than the Ashmores, every surface gilded or crystalline. The cream of London society gathered to see and be seen. Seren felt hundreds of eyes track their entrance. The Duke of Ashworth, with his mysterious companion, the scandal of the season made manifest. Steady, Calum murmured, his hand covering hers where it rested on his arm. They're watching because they're curious. Let them wonder. They descended into the ballroom's glittering chaos. Introductions blurred together. Lord. This. Lady that. The Marchioness of somewhere important. Seren smiled and curtsied, and made appropriate responses, all while aware of the whispers following in their wake. Is that the Holbrook girl? The one from the lemonade incident? She's quite pretty, isn't she? One wouldn't have guessed from the rumors. But no fortune, no family, no prospects. What can the Duke possibly be thinking? Through it all, Xylem stayed close. Not obviously, not improperly, but always within reach. A hand at her elbow during a complicated introduction. A quiet word when a conversation grew uncomfortable. A wall of aristocratic authority between her and the worst of the curious stares. It was protective. It was unexpected. It made something flutter dangerously in her chest. Then Lady Lysanne arrived. She entered like a queen approaching her throne. Golden curls perfectly arranged, ivory silk gown cut to emphasize her considerable beauty. The crowd seemed to part for her automatically, recognizing a force of nature when they saw one. Her eyes found Serene immediately. The smile that curved her perfect lips held no warmth whatsoever. Your Grace. Lysanne curtsied to Calum with practiced grace. How wonderful to see you out in society again. And Miss Holbrook, was it? How delightful that you could join us. The pause before her name was deliberate, the slight emphasis on delightful suggesting the opposite. Lady Lysanne. Seren kept her voice pleasant. Your gown is stunning. Ivory is certainly striking on you. Thank you. One must be precise about these things. Lysanne's gaze swept over Seren's champagne silk with barely concealed assessment. Though I suppose precision comes with experience, first seasons can be so overwhelming for those new to this world. I'm not in my first season, Lady Lysanne. I'm 27. The number landed like a slap. In society's terms, Seren was practically ancient, well past the age when most women secured matches. She'd just announced her own deficiency in the most public possible setting. But she'd also denied Lysanne the chance to reveal it cruelly. Something flickered in the other woman's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or recalculation. How refreshingly candid. Most women are less forthcoming about their circumstances. I find honesty saves time. Does it? Lysanne's smile sharpened. I wonder what other honest revelations you might share, about your family's difficulties perhaps, your father's unfortunate business decisions. The blow landed precisely where intended. Seren felt heat rise to her cheeks, but before she could respond, Calum spoke. Miss Holbrook's family history is well known, and entirely irrelevant. His voice was cold enough to freeze the champagne in nearby glasses. If you'll excuse us, Lady Lysanne, I believe the next waltz is ours. He swept Seren onto the dance floor before Lysanne could reply, leaving the golden beauty standing alone in a crowd that suddenly seemed less friendly. You didn't need to do that, Seren said as they took position for the waltz. I disagree. She'll be furious. She was already furious. At least now she's furious and publicly embarrassed. The music began, and he pulled her into the first steps. Also, she was wrong. Your circumstances aren't unfortunate. They're temporary. There's a difference. Something warm bloomed in Seren's chest. You believe that? I wouldn't have made our arrangement otherwise. They moved through the waltz, and despite everything, the watching eyes, the whispered judgments, the battle she'd just barely survived, Seren felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope. You dance well, Calum observed. Better than I expected. My mother ensured I had every accomplishment a gentleman might require. Bitterness crept into her voice. For all the good it did me. It's doing you good now. His hand pressed more firmly against her waist as they swept through a turn. Stop thinking about the past, Miss Holbrook. You're here, in this moment, dancing with a duke while half of London watches. Whatever came before doesn't matter. Easy for you to say. You've never had a past that haunted you. His expression flickered. Haven't I? The music swelled, and they moved together with surprising grace. Seren was aware of everything. The warmth of his hand, the intensity of his gaze, the way the candlelight played across his sharp features. He wasn't handsome in the conventional sense, but there was something compelling about him, something that made it difficult to look away. "They're watching us," she whispered. "Let them watch." His eyes held hers. For once, let them see something worth talking about. The waltz ended too soon. Calum released her with formal propriety, bowing over her hand, while the ballroom held its breath. "Thank you for the dance, Miss Holbrook." "The honor was mine, Your Grace." He should have left then. Protocol demanded he circulate, speak to other guests, maintain appropriate distance. Instead, he guided her toward the terrace doors, one hand at the small of her back. "We need air," he said quietly, "and you need a moment to breathe." The terrace was cooler, the night air a relief after the ballroom's stifling heat. They stood at the balustrade, looking out over moonlit gardens, the sounds of the ball muffled behind them. "You handled Lysanne well," Calum said. "Better than most. She'll retaliate, undoubtedly. But you've established yourself as someone who fights back. That matters." Seren wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the mild evening. "Why does she want you so badly?" "Beyond the obvious. The title, the wealth, the position. There must be dozens of eligible men she could pursue. Because I'm the one she's been promised." Calum's voice was flat. "Our families have expected this match since we were children. Lysanne has built her entire identity around becoming Duchess of Ashworth. And you? I've built my identity around avoiding it." She turned to face him, studying his profile in the moonlight. "Why? Is she so terrible?" "She's perfectly suitable." The word dripped with disdain. Beautiful, accomplished, well-connected. She'd make an exemplary duchess and a miserable wife. Not for any fault of her own. Simply because, he paused. "Because I don't feel anything when I look at her. And spending a lifetime with someone who stirs nothing in you seems its own kind of death." The confession hung between them, intimate and unexpected. "What would you want instead?" Seren asked softly. "If you could choose?" His gaze finally met hers, and something in his expression made her pulse quicken. "I don't know," he said. "I stopped believing I could choose years ago." Before she could respond, voices approached from the ballroom. They stepped apart instinctively, propriety reasserting itself. But as Lysanne appeared in the doorway, her eyes sharp with calculation, Seren carried with her the weight of Calum's confession. He wanted to feel something, and standing beside him in the moonlight, she was beginning to feel something too. That, she realized, was far more dangerous than anything Lady Lysanne could do. The days following the Thornbury Ball passed in a strange, suspended reality. Society buzzed with speculation. Invitations flooded Ashworth House, more than Seren had received in her entire life combined. Suddenly, everyone wanted to know the mysterious Miss Holbrook, the woman who had captured the elusive Duke's attention. Lady Lysanne had not retaliated. Yet. That silence worried Seren more than any direct attack would have. Women like Lysanne didn't retreat. They regrouped. Whatever was coming would be calculated, precise, and devastating. But for now, an uneasy peace reigned. Calum continued his pattern of absence, but something had shifted. He appeared at meals more regularly. He lingered in doorways when she passed. And every evening, without fail, he joined her in the library. They didn't speak of the terrace conversation. They didn't need to. Something had opened between them that night, a crack in the careful walls they'd both constructed. Now they existed in the space that crack had created. Not quite intimate, not quite distant, hovering on a threshold neither seemed willing to cross. On the fourth evening, Seren found a package waiting on her usual chair. It was wrapped in brown paper, unassuming, with no card or indication of its sender. She unwrapped it carefully to find a book, old, beautifully bound in deep green leather, the pages soft with age and love. Collected verses of Margot Sinclair. Her breath stopped in her throat. Margot Sinclair was her mother's favorite poet, an obscure writer from the previous century, largely forgotten by fashionable society. Seren had grown up hearing these verses read aloud on winter evenings, her mother's voice soft in the candlelight. She'd memorized half of them before she turned 12, whispered them to herself during the darkest days after their fall from grace. When they'd lost everything, the family's copy had been sold with the rest of their possessions. She'd watched it go with silent anguish, unable to explain to the estate agent why that particular book mattered more than all the silver combined. She hadn't mentioned this to anyone at Ashworth House, not once. It belonged to my mother. Calum's voice came from the doorway, quiet and uncertain in a way she'd never heard from him. He entered slowly, his usual commanding presence somehow diminished, as if he'd stripped away a layer of armor. I found it in the estate library at Thornwood, our northern property. She'd written notes in the margins. He moved closer, gesturing to the book. Open the first page. Seren did, and her throat constricted with sudden emotion. In faded ink, elegant handwriting spelled out, "For my son, that he might understand, beauty exists even in darkness." Mother. She died when I was 7, Calum said quietly. I barely remember her face anymore. Sometimes I'll catch a scent, lavender and old paper, and feel her presence so strongly it takes my breath away. But the details have faded. He paused, vulnerability naked in his voice. I remember her reading these poems to me, though. The sound of her voice rising and falling with the verses. The way she'd pause after particularly beautiful lines, as if giving me time to absorb them. Seren looked up at him, this cold, controlled man who had just handed her a piece of his mother's memory. Perhaps the most precious thing he possessed. "How did you know?" she whispered. "About Margot Sinclair. I never mentioned the specific poet. I asked your mother." The words landed like stones in still water, sending ripples through everything she thought she understood. "You... what?" "I visited your family home 3 days ago, discreetly, through the servants' entrance to avoid gossip." Something almost like embarrassment flickered across his features, an expression she wouldn't have believed him capable of a week ago. "I wanted to ensure the investment arrangements were proceeding correctly. Your father seemed fragile, but your mother and I spoke briefly in the garden. You spoke to my mother, in our garden. She's quite formidable, actually. I see where you inherited your spine." The ghost of a smile crossed his face. "She mentioned her favorite poet, and when I realized we had a volume in the estate collection, my mother's volume with her annotations, I thought..." He trailed off, suddenly seeming uncertain. The Duke of Ashworth, uncertain. It was like watching a mountain question its own existence. "You thought what?" "I thought perhaps this book could mean something to someone again. Instead of gathering dust in a library, no one visits anymore." Seren clutched the book to her chest, overwhelmed by the gesture and everything it implied. This wasn't part of their arrangement. This wasn't business or strategy or social maneuvering. This was a man sharing his mother's memory with her mother's favorite words. Something dangerous. Something real. "You didn't have to do this," she managed around the tightness in her throat. "I know. It's too much. This book is precious. It belonged to your mother. It has her handwriting." and now it belongs to someone who will treasure it. His eyes held hers with unsettling intensity. That matters more than preservation. Objects should be loved, not merely kept. My mother would have wanted that. She felt tears threatening to spill and blinked them back furiously. She would not cry in front of him. She would not give him that power over her emotions. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick despite her efforts. "This is the kindest thing anyone has done for me in years." Then people have been remarkably unkind. He stepped back, re-establishing distance, retreating behind his walls as if frightened by his own vulnerability. "I should let you read." The third section was her favorite, the verses about surviving winter. She underlined nearly every one. He was at the door when she spoke again. Calum, his first name. She'd never used it before. Never? He stopped, his back to her, every line of his body suddenly tense. "Your mother sounds like she was extraordinary." He didn't turn around. "She was." "I think she would be proud of the man you've become." Silence stretched between them, fragile and weighted with everything neither of them could say. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with suppressed emotion. "I'm not certain she would. But thank you for believing it." He left, and Seren sat alone with a dead woman's poetry and the growing, terrifying certainty that she was falling in love with a man she could never truly have. The book fell open to the third section. Her eyes landed on a verse, underlined in faded ink. "Even frozen rivers remember how to flow. Even shuttered hearts recall the sun. Love is patient. Love is slow. Love waits until the winter's done." In the margin, in that same elegant hand. "For see, when he is ready." Serene pressed the book against her heart and let herself hope for something she had no right to want. The Hargrave Music Hall was smaller than the previous events, more intimate, more dangerous. Fewer guests meant fewer places to hide. Every conversation carried weight. Every glance was observed and catalogued. Seren smoothed her hands over her midnight blue velvet gown, a deeper, more dramatic choice than the champagne silk of the Thornbury ball, and tried to steady her nerves. "You look exquisite," Mari whispered, as they entered Lord Hargrave's grand foyer. "That color makes your eyes luminous." "I feel like I'm walking into battle. Same thing in society, darling. The weapons are just smaller and sharper." The evening's entertainment was a renowned soprano performing arias from Italian operas. Guests gathered in Lord Hargrave's music room, chairs arranged in careful rows, the social hierarchy visible in every seating assignment. Seren found herself placed near the back, appropriate for her uncertain status, while Calum was positioned near the front with the Dowager and, inevitably, Lady Lysanne. The golden beauty was resplendent in rose silk tonight, her smile serene, her posture perfect. She looked like a duchess already. She looked like she belonged at Calum's side in a way Seren never could. "Stop," she told herself firmly. "This is an arrangement. Nothing more." But the book of poetry sat in her room at Ashworth House, its pages marked with his mother's handwriting, and nothing felt like nothing anymore. The soprano's voice soared through the opening aria, something Italian about impossible longing and hearts torn between duty and desire. Seren tried to focus on the music, on the technical brilliance of the performance, on anything besides the rigid line of Calum's shoulders 3 rows ahead. She failed utterly. Her attention kept drifting to him, to the way he held himself with careful stillness, to the slight tension in his neck when Lysanne leaned close to whisper something in his ear. Whatever she said made his posture stiffen visibly. The music built to an emotional crescendo, the soprano's voice breaking with artistic anguish over lost love and impossible longing, and Seren felt it pierce her chest like a blade. This was foolish. She was foolish. She'd entered this arrangement with her eyes open, knowing it was temporary, knowing she could never truly have him. And yet here she was, aching with jealousy over a woman who had every right to his attention. Lysanne placed her hand on Kylem's arm during a quiet passage. He didn't remove it. Serenne's fingers curled around her program so tightly the paper crumpled. When the performance ended, applause rippled through the room. Guests rose, conversation resuming, the careful dance of social interaction beginning again. Serene slipped away before anyone could engage her. She found herself in Lord Hargrave's conservatory, a glass-walled room filled with exotic plants and humid air, moonlight filtering through the panes above. It was quiet here, removed from the glittering crowd, a sanctuary for someone who suddenly couldn't breathe without him. "This is madness," she told herself. "You've known him barely a month. You cannot feel this much for someone you barely know." But she did. God help her, she did. Running away? She spun to find Kylem in the doorway, his expression unreadable in the silvered light. He'd removed his gloves, she noticed. His hands looked different bare, more human, more vulnerable. "Taking air," she corrected, her voice steadier than she felt. The music room was stifling. Liar. He entered, closing the door behind him with deliberate care. The click of the latch seemed impossibly loud in the humid silence. "You've been avoiding me all evening," he continued, moving closer with each word. Refusing to meet my eyes, practically flinching when Lysanne touched my arm during the second area. I did not flinch. You gripped your program so tightly it tore. Serene had no response to that. It was true, and they both knew it. This arrangement, Kylem said slowly, was supposed to be simple. A performance, a mutual benefit. We both understood the terms. Yes. So why does nothing about this feel simple anymore? The question hung between them, heavy with implication. Serene's pulse raced so loudly she was certain he could hear it. "I don't know what you mean." Another lie. He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of ice in his eyes, the barely controlled tension in his bearing. "I've spent 8 months feeling nothing, Miss Holbrook. No joy, no hope, no anger. Just endless gray numbness that made every day identical to the last. Then you spilled lemonade on my waistcoat, and suddenly—" "Suddenly what?" "Suddenly I feel everything." The words came out rough, almost angry. "I feel fury when Lysanne touches me because her hands aren't yours. I feel terror when I imagine this arrangement ending and you disappearing from my life. I feel desperate, pathetic hope every evening when I hear your footsteps approaching the library." Serene's composure crumbled entirely. "Kylem, I wasn't supposed to feel anything for you." He was close now, inches away, his voice barely above a whisper. "You were supposed to be a solution, not a complication. A temporary arrangement, not a permanent obsession. But God help me, Serene, I cannot stop thinking about you." Her name on his lips. Not Miss Holbrook. "Serene, this is madness," she whispered. "I know. There's no future in this. You're a duke. I'm nobody. Your grandmother, society, everything. I don't care. You should care. Probably." He raised his hand, his fingertips hovering just above her cheek, not quite touching. "Tell me to stop. Tell me this is just a performance, just an arrangement, and I'll believe you. I'll walk away and never mention this again." She should say it. She should protect herself, protect him, maintain the careful boundaries that kept everything safe and simple and controlled. Instead, she leaned into his touch. His fingers met her skin, tracing the line of her jaw with devastating gentleness. His other hand found her waist, drawing her closer. She could feel the heat of him through layers of silk and velvet, could see the war playing out in his expression. Desire battling restraint, hope battling fear. Serene. Her name was a prayer. "Tell me to stop." "I can't," she breathed. God help me. I can't. He kissed her. It was nothing like she'd imagined. Nothing soft or tentative or questioning. It was acclaiming, fierce, and desperate. 8 months of frozen emotion cracking open all at once. His mouth moved against hers with a hunger that stole her breath, his arms pulling her against him as if he could make her part of himself through sheer will. She kissed him back with equal desperation, her fingers tangling in his dark hair, every rational thought drowning in the flood of sensation. He tasted of champagne and longing, and she wanted to live in this moment forever, suspended in this impossible, glorious madness. When they finally broke apart, gasping, his forehead pressed against hers, she saw something in his eyes she'd never expected to find. Vulnerability. Naked, terrified, beautiful vulnerability. "This changes everything," he said. "I know. I won't give you up. I don't care what it costs. Calum, I love you." The words shattered something inside her, some last wall of self-protection she hadn't realized she was still maintaining. Tears pricked her eyes. "You can't," she whispered. "You barely know me. I know you challenge me. I know you make me want to be better than I am. I know that for the first time since my father died, I feel alive." His hands framed her face, thumbs brushing away the tears that had escaped. "Is that not enough?" "It's everything," she admitted. "It's more than everything." "Then say it. If you feel it, say it." She should be cautious. She should protect herself. She should remember that this was temporary, that she didn't belong in his world, that fairy tales didn't happen to girls like her. Instead, she told the truth. "I love you," against every rational thought, every instinct for self-preservation, every reason I should know better. "I love you." He kissed her again, softer this time, a promise instead of a claim. Neither of them heard the door open. Neither of them saw Lady Lysanne's face, twisted with fury, watching from the shadows. Neither of them noticed when she slipped away, a cold smile curving her perfect lips, the smile of a woman who had just discovered exactly how to destroy them both. The attack came 2 days later. Seren descended for breakfast to find the morning room transformed into a battlefield. The dowager sat rigid at the head of the table, her face carved from ice. Mari hovered near the sideboard, pale and frightened, and Calum stood at the window, his back to the room, every line of his body radiating barely contained fury. "Ah," the dowager's voice cut like a blade. "The architect of our destruction finally arrives." "Grandmother," Mari started. Silence. The older woman held up a newspaper, one of the society scandal sheets that traded in gossip and innuendo. "Would you like to read it yourself, Miss Holbrook, or shall I summarize?" Serene's stomach plummeted. "What has happened?" "What has happened is that Lady Lysanne has proven herself more cunning than I gave her credit for." The dowager threw the paper onto the table. "The entire ton is reading about how the Duke of Ashworth was discovered in a passionate embrace with his impoverished houseguest. How said houseguest is nothing but a fortune hunter who schemed her way into his home. How the arrangement between you was exactly that, a calculated manipulation designed to trap my grandson into an unsuitable match." The words blurred together, each one a blow. "There's more," the dowager continued relentlessly. "Details about your father's scandal, implications that the embezzlement was not entirely his partner's doing, suggestions that your entire family is riddled with dishonesty and desperation." "That's not true." Seren's voice came out strangled. "My father was innocent. He was betrayed. The truth doesn't matter, only the appearance of truth." The dowager rose, her fury barely contained beneath a veneer of aristocratic control. Do you understand what you've done? My grandson's reputation, his standing, everything our family has built, compromised. For what? A girl who couldn't control her impulses for one more month? Grandmother. Caleb's voice was low and dangerous. That's enough. It is nowhere near enough. The Dowager turned on him. You promised me this would be controlled. You promised me no scandal would touch us. And now, we're the subject of every whispered conversation in London. I don't care about whispered conversations. You should. You're the Duke of Ashworth. Your behavior reflects on every member of this family, on every servant in our employ, on every tenant on our lands. Your selfishness has consequences beyond your own satisfaction. Serene couldn't breathe. The walls were closing in, the elegant room becoming a prison. Everything she'd feared, everything she'd warned herself about. It was happening. I should leave, she heard herself say. Kylam turned sharply. No. Yes. The Dowager's voice was cold. That would be best, before you do any more damage. She's not going anywhere. Kylam crossed the room, placing himself between Serene and his grandmother, like a shield. This is Lysanne's doing, not hers. I won't punish Serene for another woman's spite. You'll punish us all if you continue this foolishness. The Dowager's composure finally cracked. She is not one of us, Kylam. She never was. She's a merchant's daughter playing dress-up in borrowed gowns, and no amount of pretty sentiment will change that. Society will never accept her. I will never accept her. The words landed like physical blows. Serene felt each one. Every dismissal, every reminder of her insufficiency, every echo of her own deepest fears. You're wrong, Kylam said. Am I? The Dowager stepped closer, her voice dropping to something almost gentle, which somehow made it worse. Look at her, Kylam. Really look. Do you see confidence? Do you see someone who believes she deserves to stand at your side? Or do you see a frightened girl who knows, in her heart, that this was always going to end in destruction? Serene couldn't meet Kylam's eyes. She couldn't look at any of them, because the Dowager was right. Serene, his voice was soft, pleading. Don't listen to her. She's trying to manipulate you. She's trying to protect you. Serene forced the words through the tightness in her throat, as I should have done from the beginning. What are you saying? She finally looked at him, and the hope in his eyes nearly broke her. But she could see beyond him now. See the ruin they'd caused, the scandal they'd created, the damage that would follow him forever if she stayed. She loved him. That was the terrible truth. She loved him enough to destroy herself for his sake. I'm saying this was a mistake. Each word felt like swallowing glass. The arrangement, the feelings, all of it. Your grandmother is right. I don't belong here. I never did. You don't mean that. I mean every word. She stepped back, putting distance between them. I should have been stronger. I should have maintained the boundaries. Instead, I let myself believe in something impossible, and now we're both paying the price. Serene, please! Don't, her voice cracked. Don't make this harder than it has to be. She turned and walked out of the morning room, every step a betrayal of her own heart. Behind her, she heard Kylam call her name, heard Mari's distressed cry, heard the Dowager's satisfied silence. She didn't stop. In her room, the beautiful rose suite that had never truly been hers, she packed with mechanical efficiency. The gowns she left, the jewelry she left, the pearls, the gloves, the careful accessories of a life she'd borrowed. She took only the Margot Sinclair poetry collection, pressed against her heart like a talisman. Tansy appeared in the doorway, tears streaming down her face. Miss, please, His Grace is asking for you. He's half mad with... Tell him I'm sorry. Serene closed her valise. Tell him it's better this way. But it isn't. Anyone can see. Please, Tansy. Her voice broke. Don't make this worse. She slipped out through the servants' entrance, avoiding the front of the house where Kylam would certainly be watching. A hired carriage waited on the corner, arranged with the last coins she possessed. As the carriage pulled away from Ashworth House, Seren allowed herself one look back. Kylam stood at an upper window, his face a mask of devastation. Their eyes met across the distance, and she saw everything she'd destroyed written in his expression. Then the carriage turned the corner, and he was gone. She pressed her face against the worn leather seat and let herself shatter completely. Home was exactly as she'd left it, modest, worn, filled with the ghosts of better days. Her mother embraced her without questions. Her father emerged from his study, took one look at her face, and retreated again. Stellan hovered awkwardly, guilt etched into his features. I'm sorry, he kept saying. Seren, I'm so sorry. I never meant for... It's not your fault. But it was everyone's fault. Her fault for hoping. Kylam's fault for making her believe. Society's fault for constructing rules that made love a liability. She retreated to her childhood room, clutched her mother's poetry book, and tried to remember how to breathe without him. The verses blurred through her tears. Even frozen rivers remember how to flow. But some rivers, she thought, simply freeze forever. 3 days passed in gray monotony. Seren moved through the motions of her old life, helping with household tasks, accompanying her mother to market, sitting with her father in silent companionship. She smiled when expected, responded when addressed, performed normalcy with desperate determination. No one was fooled. You're breaking, her mother said on the third evening, finding Seren alone in the small parlor, staring at nothing. I can see it happening. I'm fine. You haven't slept. You've barely eaten. You hold that poetry book like it's the only thing keeping you tethered to earth. Her mother sat beside her, taking her hands gently. Tell me what happened. Really. So Seren told her. Everything. The arrangement, the growing feelings, the kiss in the conservatory, the scandal, the terrible confrontation with the dowager. The words poured out like water from a broken dam, 3 days of suppressed anguish, finally finding release. When she finished, her mother was silent for a long moment. You love him, she said finally. Yes. And he loves you? He said he did. But it doesn't matter. His grandmother was right. I don't belong in his world. I would only drag him down, damage his reputation, make him regret. Stop. The word was sharp, uncharacteristic. Seren looked up, startled. I have watched you sacrifice for this family for 3 years, her mother said, her voice trembling with emotion. I have watched you give up your dreams, your prospects, your hope, all without complaint. You never asked for anything, never demanded anything. You simply endured, because that's who you are. Mother, I'm not finished. Her mother's grip tightened. You found something rare, Seren. Someone who sees you, who values you, who fought his own family for the right to love you. And you threw it away. Not because you don't want it, but because you're afraid you don't deserve it. The words struck like lightning, illuminating truth Seren had refused to see. The dowager said what served her purposes. She said what would make you doubt yourself enough to run. Her mother's eyes blazed with fierce conviction. Don't you see? You've spent so long believing you're not enough that you've forgotten how to recognize when someone thinks you're everything. Seren's chest ached with the truth of it. Even if that's true, I can't go back. The scandals fade, love doesn't. Her mother released her hands, standing with sudden resolve. You've spent 3 years surviving, sweetheart. Perhaps it's time to start living. Before Seren could respond, a commotion erupted in the entrance hall, raised voices, her brother's startled exclamation, and then the parlor door burst open. Kylam stood on the threshold, wild-eyed and disheveled in a way she'd never seen. His cravat was askew, his coat wrinkled as if he'd slept in it, his dark hair falling across his forehead in disarray. "You left," he said, his voice raw. "You left without letting me speak." "Your Grace." Her mother rose, her expression knowing. "Perhaps I should give you a moment." She departed, closing the door with pointed deliberation, leaving them alone. Seren stood frozen, her pulse racing. "You shouldn't be here. The scandal. Damn the scandal." He crossed the room in 3 strides, stopping just short of touching her. "I've spent 3 days trying to respect your wishes. 3 days telling myself that if you wanted to leave, I should let you go. 3 days dying by inches because you're not there." "Kylam, I'm not finished." The echo of her mother's words wasn't lost on her. "You said this was a mistake. You said you don't belong in my world. You said my grandmother was right." She was terrified. His pale eyes burned into hers with desperate intensity. "She saw me falling in love with someone she couldn't control, and she used every weapon in her arsenal to drive you away. She said what would hurt you most because she knew that you were strong enough to leave me for my own good." Seren's breath caught. It's exactly what happened." He finally reached for her, his hands framing her face with desperate gentleness. "But here's what she didn't count on. I'm not my father. I'm not going to lose the woman I love because I was too afraid to fight for her." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I can't let you destroy yourself for me." "You're not destroying me. You're saving me." His thumbs brushed away her tears. "Don't you understand? Before you, I was frozen, going through the motions, performing a life instead of living one. You made me feel again. You made me want again. You made me believe that maybe, there's more to existence than duty and grief. The Tun will never accept me. Your grandmother, my grandmother has already begun managing the narrative. By the time she's finished, Lysanne will be remembered as a jealous schemer, and you'll be the romantic heroine who captured a duke's heart against all odds." Seren stared at him, disbelief flooding through her. "What?" "She came to me the morning after you left. She said, and I quote, 'I underestimated her. She left to protect you. That's more than Lysanne would ever do.'" A ghost of a smile crossed his exhausted face. "Apparently, self-sacrifice is the fastest way to earn my grandmother's approval. I don't understand. Neither do I, entirely. But she's on our side now." His hand slid down to grip hers with fierce determination. "Seren, I'm asking you, begging you, to come back. Not as an arrangement, not as a performance, as my partner, my equal, my love." "You're mad," she whispered, "completely, utterly, irreversibly mad." He pressed his forehead to hers. "Say yes. The world will talk. Let them. It won't be easy. Nothing worthwhile ever is. I'm terrified. So am I." His voice cracked with raw honesty. "But I'm more terrified of living without you. These 3 days have been a preview of the rest of my life without you in it. And I refuse to accept that emptiness as my future." Seren closed her eyes, her mother's words echoing in her mind. "You've spent 3 years surviving. Perhaps it's time to start living." "Yes," she breathed. He kissed her, fierce and tender and full of promise, and she let herself fall into the certainty of his arms. When they finally broke apart, he was smiling, actually smiling without reserve or control. "We have one more battle to fight," he said. "Your grandmother." "No, she's already planning our engagement ball." His smile turned determined. "Lady Lysanne, she needs to understand, publicly and permanently, that she's lost." Seren straightened her spine, feeling something unfamiliar rise in her chest. Courage. "Then let's show her." The return to Ashworth House felt different this time. Serene entered not as a desperate interloper clinging to borrowed status, but as someone who had been chosen, someone who had been fought for, someone who belonged. The Dowager waited in the formal drawing room, her posture as impeccable as ever. But something had shifted in her expression. The ice had thawed, just slightly. "Miss Holbrook." She rose, which was itself unprecedented. "You've returned. Your grandson is very persuasive. He's very stubborn. There's a difference." The Dowager approached, her gray eyes, so like Kylam's, searching Seren's face with new intensity. "I owe you an apology." Seren blinked, unable to conceal her surprise. "Your Grace, I was cruel. Deliberately, strategically cruel. Because I believed it was the fastest way to remove you from my grandson's life." The older woman's voice held no self-pity, only frank acknowledgement. "I was wrong. Not about my methods. Those were effective. But about my goal. I don't understand. When you left to protect Calum from scandal, you proved something I hadn't expected." The Dowager's lips curved into something almost resembling warmth. "You proved you love him more than you love yourself. That's rare, Miss Holbrook, rare and precious, and exactly what this family needs." Serene felt tears prick her eyes. "I'm still unsuitable. I'm still a merchant's daughter, with a ruined reputation and no fortune. Fortune can be provided. Reputation can be managed. What cannot be manufactured is genuine devotion." The Dowager reached out, taking Seren's hands in her own, a gesture so unexpected that Seren nearly flinched. "I spent 40 years loving a man who married me for alliance, rather than affection. I know the difference between a suitable match and a happy one. I won't condemn my grandson to my own mistake." Before Seren could respond, Mari burst into the room, abandoning all pretense of dignity to throw herself into Seren's arms. "You're back. I knew you'd come back. I told grandmother. I said, Calum won't let her go. He's too stubborn and too in love, and I was right." "You were right," Seren admitted, laughing despite her tears. "Now." The Dowager's voice sharpened, regaining its customary authority. "We have a battle to plan. Lady Lysanne has overplayed her hand, but she doesn't know it yet. Tonight's Harrowgate Gala will be the stage for her final defeat." "Tonight?" Seren's stomach lurched. "That's too soon. I don't have a gown. I haven't prepared. You have 3 hours. Madame Verity is already on her way with the gown we commissioned before." "Everything." The Dowager's expression turned calculating. "Silver silk with diamond embroidery. You'll outshine every woman there, including, especially, Lady Lysanne. What exactly are we planning?" "A statement." Calum appeared in the doorway, freshly dressed, all traces of his desperate dishevelment erased. "A public, undeniable statement that you are mine, and I am yours, and anyone who objects can go hang." "Eloquently put," the Dowager said dryly. "I thought so." The hours that followed were a whirlwind of preparation. Madame Verity arrived with the silver gown, which fit as if it had been designed for this moment, which Seren supposed it had been. Mari fussed with her hair, while Tansy handled the delicate work of fastening diamond drops to her ears. When Seren finally looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. The woman who stared back was luminous, elegant, powerful. Not a forgotten spinster. Not a merchant's daughter playing dress-up. Someone new entirely. someone forged from struggle and love and the stubborn refusal to be diminished. Perfect, Mari breathed. Adequate, the dowager corrected, but her eyes gleamed with approval. Devastating, Kylam said from the doorway, his voice rough with emotion. The Harrogate Gala was the event of the season, the final major gathering before society scattered to country estates for the summer. Everyone who mattered was there, including Lady Lysanne, resplendent in gold silk that now seemed garish compared to Serene's ethereal silver. They descended the grand staircase together, Kylam and Seren side by side, the dowager and Mari following. A duchess's escort, a family united. The whispers started immediately, but these whispers held a different quality, curiosity rather than condemnation, fascination rather than scorn. Lady Lysanne stood near the center of the ballroom, surrounded by her usual admirers. When she saw Seren, her perfect composure cracked, just for a moment, before reforming into a mask of brittle hostility. "You've made a mistake," Lysanne said as they approached, her voice pitched to Carrie. "Coming here, showing your face after everything." "Have I?" Seren kept her voice pleasant. "I rather thought I was accepting an invitation." "An invitation extended before your true nature was revealed." "My true nature?" Seren tilted her head. "You mean my nature as a woman who loves your intended target?" "Forgive me. I wasn't aware feelings were scandalous." Lysanne's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Feelings. Is that what you're calling your calculated manipulation?" "I'm calling it what it is. Unlike, say, planting false stories in scandal sheets to destroy someone who threatens your ambitions." Seren let the accusation land with precision. "That seems rather more calculated than anything I've done." The watching crowd murmured with growing interest. This was entertainment of the highest order. Two women battling for a duke, neither willing to yield. "You have no proof. I have the testimony of your own lady's maid, who was remarkably willing to share details once she realized her position was at risk." The dowager stepped forward, her voice cutting through Lysanne's denial like a blade. "The arrangement of payment, the specific phrases you provided, the timing of the publication." Lysanne's face went white. "Society forgives many things," the dowager continued with devastating calm. "Ambition, desperation, even cruelty in the right circumstances. But society does not forgive being caught. You've overreached, Lady Lysanne. The consequences are yours to bear." For a moment, Lysanne seemed ready to fight, to launch some final desperate attack. Then her gaze swept the room, registering the shifted allegiances, the closed expressions of former allies, the absence of support. She had lost. She knew it. Without another word, Lady Lysanne turned and walked away, her golden gown disappearing through the crowd. A collective breath released throughout the ballroom, and Kylam, taking Seren's hand, raised it to his lips with deliberate reverence. "Now," he said, loud enough for all to hear, "shall we dance?" The waltz was perfect. Seren moved in Kylam's arms, as if they'd been dancing together for years. The crowd parting to watch, whispers transforming from scandal to romance with every graceful turn. The Duke of Ashworth, cold and distant for so long, gazed at his partner with undisguised adoration. Society, it seemed, loved a love story even more than it loved a scandal. When the music ended, Kylam didn't release her. Instead, he turned to face the assembled guests, his hand firmly clasping hers. "I have an announcement." The ballroom fell silent. Even the servants paused, sensing the significance of the moment. Many of you have heard rumors about Miss Holbrook and myself. Some true, some wildly exaggerated, some outright fabricated. His gaze swept the room, commanding attention with the ease of generations of authority. "Allow me to clarify the truth." Seren's heart hammered. They hadn't discussed this. She had no idea what he was about to do. Miss Saren Holbrook came into my life through circumstances that could charitably be described as unconventional. A ripple of knowing laughter moved through the crowd. She was not what I expected. She was not what I thought I wanted. She was, in fact, precisely what I needed. He turned to face her fully, and the love in his eyes made her breath catch. I have spent the last year lost in grief and duty, performing a life I no longer believed in. This woman, this brilliant, brave, frustrating, magnificent woman, reminded me that there's a difference between existing and living. She challenged me. She refused to be impressed by my title or intimidated by my temper. She saw through every wall I'd constructed and demanded I be better than I was. Murmurs of surprise moved through the crowd. Dukes did not make declarations like this. Dukes did not bare their souls in public. This Duke, apparently, did. "I love her," Kylam continued, his voice carrying through the hushed ballroom. "I love her with everything I have and everything I hope to become. And I refuse to pretend otherwise for the sake of propriety or expectation or the comfort of those who believe birth determines worth." He reached into his jacket and withdrew something small, something that caught the chandelier light and sparkled. A ring. Serene's heart stopped. Miss Saren Holbrook. He dropped to one knee, and somewhere in the crowd, she heard Mari's delighted gasp. "I was a fool before I met you, and I'll likely remain a fool after. But I'll be your fool if you'll have me. Will you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" The ballroom held its breath. Serene looked down at this man, this impossible, infuriating, wonderful man who had chosen her, not despite her circumstances, but because of who she was beneath them, who had fought his family, defied society, and knelt before hundreds of witnesses to declare his love. "Yes," she whispered. Louder, he murmured, a smile playing at his lips. "They can't hear you in the back." "Yes," she laughed, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, you impossible man, yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, a sapphire surrounded by diamonds, the color of the gown she'd worn the night they first kissed, and rose to kiss her properly, scandalously, in full view of the entire ton. The applause that erupted was thunderous. Later, she would remember fragments, Mari embracing her with tear-streaked joy, the dowager nodding with something that looked remarkably like satisfaction. Her mother and father, summoned by a messenger Kylam had secretly dispatched that afternoon, watching from the gallery with wonder on their faces. Stellan pumping Kylam's hand with awkward enthusiasm. But mostly, she would remember the way Kylam looked at her, as if she'd hung the moon and every star besides. "You planned this," she accused him later, when they'd escaped to a quiet alcove. "The ring, the speech, my parents. I planned nothing." His smile was unrepentant. "I simply hoped. There's a difference." "Liar. Probably." He pulled her closer. "Are you angry?" "I'm overwhelmed. I'm terrified. I'm happier than I've ever been in my life." She pressed her forehead to his. "Is this real?" "It's real," he promised, "for as long as you'll have me." 6 months later, the wedding was the social event of the year. It took place at the Ravencroft family chapel, a medieval jewel nestled in the gardens of their country estate. Every notable family in England attended. The scandal sheets devoted pages to describing the bride's gown, the flowers, the way the Duke's eyes never left his future Duchess's face. Serene walked down the aisle on her father's arm. Her father, who had emerged from his fog of despair in recent months, slowly rebuilding himself alongside the business prospects Kylam had quietly arranged. Her mother sat in the front row, weeping joyfully into a handkerchief. The vows were traditional, but the kiss was not. Kylam pulled her close with an enthusiasm that made the dowager roll her eyes, and Mari applaud. "Inappropriate," the dowager said afterward, though her tone held no censure. "Thoroughly," Kylam agreed, kissing his new wife again just to prove the point. 1 year later, they found the letter together. It was tucked inside a book of poetry, not the Margot Sinclair collection, but another volume Seren had discovered in Kylam's mother's former rooms. The handwriting was unfamiliar, elegant, and feminine. "My darling son, if you're reading this, you've found love. Real love, the kind that makes you foolish and brave and willing to defy the world. I can think of no other reason you'd be searching through my old books. Your father gave me this poem on our wedding day. He wrote it himself, though he'd be mortified if anyone knew. He was always terribly shy about his romantic side. I want you to know, love is worth every risk. I married your father against my family's wishes. They thought him beneath me, a second son with no title, no fortune, no prospects. They were wrong. He became everything. My partner, my home, my heart. Choose love, Kylam. Choose it fiercely and without apology. The world will tell you to be practical, to be proper, to be safe. Ignore the world. Be brave. All my love, forever." Your mother Seren watched Kylam read the letter, watched emotion break across his face like dawn. "She knew," he said hoarsely. "Somehow, she knew." Mothers often do. He pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was the only solid thing in a shifting world. "She would have loved you," he murmured into her hair. "I would have loved her, too." They attended the Ashmore Ball every year after. It became their tradition, returning to the place where everything had begun, where laughter had turned to love, and disaster had transformed into destiny. They would enter together, the Duke and Duchess of Ashworth, and somewhere in the course of the evening, they would find a moment alone. "Dance with me," he would say, just as he had that first night. "Always," she would answer. And in each other's arms, surrounded by the glittering world that had once mocked her and now celebrated them, they would remember. Love doesn't require perfection. It doesn't demand titles or fortunes or the approval of society. It asks only for courage, the courage to hope when hope seems foolish, to fight when fighting seems futile, to believe that two imperfect people can build something beautiful together. They had believed, and believing had made all the difference.